Hello everyone and welcome to the ASBCI's webinar today, Smart Consumers Beyond 2020 and the Post-Pandemic Digital Opportunity. Thank you for joining us. I hope you're going to be very active, both in terms of the questions that you're posing for our panelists at the end and the chat box as well, which is for more informal notes and networking. I'd like to thank Eurofins, who are our technical partners today, working with us. Eurofins Softlines and Leather, if you don't know them, they deliver comprehensive quality, safety and sustainability solutions for textiles and footwear buyers and suppliers. They have a global network of 10 labs in Asia, Europe and the US, with 2 technical competence centres in Spain and the UK. And with technical experts around the world, they assist customers of all sizes in continuous product and supply chain improvement. We are going to have a couple of poll questions, which we're going to ask you right now at the beginning of the event, and we'll come back to those at the end to gauge your opinion on what you think is going to be happening post-pandemic, if we ever get out of the other side of this, which it looks like it's going to be April. So please do take part in those polls. We'd love to hear from you and we'd love to hear your views. So we will come back to those right at the end of our webinar today. So that's my introduction part over. As I said, we are here today in 2 different parts with our presenters and then with a panel at the end, a Q&A for our panelists towards the end of the seminar. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Martin Corrigan, who's the Managing Director from Summit Media, to give our first presentation.
Fantastic. Let me just show my screen and then we'll make sure we're all set. Can everyone see my screen? Just put the presentation up.
Yeah, and just needs to be full screen. We can see your notes.
Okay, let me change the display settings. Try that.
Perfect.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the introduction, Julie. So my name's Martin Corcoran. I'm the Managing Director of Summit Media. Before we go any further, I should just tell you a little bit about Summit so you understand, I guess, why I'm here and potentially able to speak on the topic of post-pandemic consumer behaviour. So Summit are 20 years old. We are a performance marketing agency and we are change makers in retail. So we're working with a variety of clothing and fashion brands, helping them sell online and using channels such as Google, Facebook, TikTok, etc. to help them engage with their customers and drive sales. We're also a technology company, so we develop our own technology to make sure that we invest our clients' money where and when to get the greatest returns. And then also in the last couple of years, we've been responsible for more than £1 billion of online sales in the UK market. So hopefully that gives us a bit of kudos and credibility to be able to talk about customers and the clothing industry. So in terms of the agenda, I've got 15 minutes. I'm just going to talk a little bit around consumer behaviours and expectations and how those have changed in the last year. There's a second piece around what that actually means for our industry, what that means for fashion and retail, and how retailers are responding. And then we're going to finish off in terms of some examples of how different retailers are exceeding consumer expectations. Okay. So in terms of the changes in terms of customer behavior in the last year, what is certain is that the pandemic has accelerated online behavior in a way that no one could have predicted. We were on this slow trajectory, online continuing to grow every single year. And then the pandemic hit, stores closed, and there was this kind of nuclear explosion in the retail industry. And it has fundamentally changed the consumer now. So what is the consumer and what matters to them? So First of all, we know that 44% of consumers expect to permanently change their shopping habits. So this isn't a short-term change. It isn't a change that, once stores can open, the pandemic goes away, everyone's going to flip back into their old behaviors. It just isn't going to happen. And actually, nearly half of the customers out there in the UK market right now say they will continue to shop more and more online versus last year. And that's some proprietary research that we've run at Summit. There's also some changes in the digital landscape in terms of, 5 or 10 years ago, customers would traditionally revert to Google to go find their products. So if we were selling online, if you were a fashion retailer, clothing retailer, customers would be able to be connected with your brand and your products via Google. And that Google had by far and away the largest share, and therefore retailers were putting more and more money into Google. Actually, over the course of the last 5 years, that has changed significantly. And the pandemic has had a real accelerator in terms of that, because what it means is actually Facebook, Instagram, TikTok are significantly growing their share of ad revenue. And actually, Facebook and Instagram are due to overtake Google this year in terms of ad revenues. So what that means is there are new audiences and new customers in new channels for you to go and engage. So you can't be over-reliant on one channel. There are 4, 5, 6 different channels where there are huge swathes of customers ready to engage with your brand and shop online. And that has changed significantly in the last year, and so some retailers and some brands could be caught out by that. The next thing is actually there's an increasing rise in terms of the popularity of augmented reality. And I don't want to labor the point, for the last 5 or 10 years as someone who's worked in the digital kind of e-commerce space, augmented reality was a fantastic buzzword that lots of retailers would come on and talk about, but actually very few customers used. More recently, we're seeing a significant uptake, a surge in customer demand for these kind of augmented reality platforms and solutions. And it's not just the case that it's a shiny thing that the retailer has built that they can talk about through industry press. Now we're seeing customers really start to engage with those augmented reality platforms. So it's a really great tool to be able to engage with customers and help them move down the funnel to purchasing. Fourthly, there's been a significant change in terms of confidence around payment solutions. The likes of PayPal, Klarna, and Apple Pay are seeing significantly more confidence across all demographics, meaning people have more trust to pay online. And finally, actually, the shift from unknown customers in store environments to known customers online, because you have to put your details in, means that there is an increasing opportunity for personalization. And actually, if the exchange is there between consumers and we give them a better experience, they're actually on the whole pretty happy and pretty positive about personalization if they get a better experience for it. So what does this mean for retailers? Actually, any retailer who has high street shops right now is going through some kind of digital transformation. And these are just, 5 or 6 screen grabs from the last couple of months. Actually, all high street omnichannel retailers are trying to accelerate this digital transformation. And that's because you go back 5 years ago, high street was the predominant channel. Physical stores were still the primary channel, and actually online was a must-have, but it also wasn't the core channel. Actually, as we've gone through the pandemic, what we're seeing now is online has become the core channel, and you will start to pick and choose how you supplement the online channel with other routes to market, such as the stores. So there's been a fundamental flip, and that's quite hard for a number of retailers to consider, particularly when it's a really confusing landscape. So actually, what is digital transformation? All these retailers are going through it right now, but what is it? So if you go to Gartner, who are the industry leading in terms of digital transformation in retail, they think it's IT modernization, cloud computing, digital optimization, pretty spurious and quite confusing. And I'm still not quite clear in terms of what each of these retailers should be doing. Same for Deloitte, same for Salesforce. Okay, actually, digital transformation is a really confusing topic because it can be so different depending upon the audience, depending upon whose experience it is. Actually at Summit, we wanted to be able to kind of simplify and clarify what digital transformation is for us and for our clients. And it's quite simply, do the stuff that your customers love online. So replicate those experiences and those reasons why customers would pick and your brand and your products, and make sure you build on those experiences and deliver them in the online channel. Okay? So it's as simple as that. And if you do that well, you're going to attract customers, you're going to retain customers, and you're going to grow the channel. So in terms of exceeding customer expectations, I just wanted to talk about 3 of our clients. So the first one being Pandora. What have they done in the last year to be able to try to re-engineer and transform digitally? And in particular, the question or the challenge was pretty challenging for Pandora, because they had a real reliance on the store environment. Okay, customers would come in and they would try on and check the size and check the style of pretty small, pretty intricate, pretty high value products. And when you take away the store environment and customers were not able to do that, Pandora delivered what I think is kind of an industry leading AR, augmented reality experience. So it means that you can actually try their products on from the comfort of your own home. And I touched upon it earlier in the sense that many retailers have launched augmented reality solutions over the last 10 years. And I've seen many occurrences of this. What typically happens over the last 10 years is they launch these things, they talk about it in the press, they might win an award or 2, but actually very few customers go on to use those solutions. The interesting thing is, since the pandemic and since COVID, we're seeing a huge uptake in terms of the number of customers willing to try and use augmented reality to improve their experience. So there is, there's the push and the pull factor. The retailers are providing it and the customers are expecting it. And Pandora have done a great example in terms of enabling their customers to get the experience that they need. The next one is 3 Mobile. So again, 3 Mobile have they previously have a 310 store network, and buying a mobile phone was quite commoditized, and it was definitely something you did in person, because it was all about getting the information in terms of the coverage, the bundles, the data costs. Okay, and because it was, again, quite high value, you were signing contracts and things like that, which again puts an extra barrier into that purchase cycle. The store played a really important role in terms of converting people, tipping them over the edge into purchase. So actually, 3 have launched their new 3 store now with personalized shopping experience to enable you to have all those same conversations that you would have in the store, to be able to check and compare prices, compare bundles, compare coverage, all the things that are very commoditized. It's apples for apples. Whether you're 3 Mobile, whether you're Vodafone, whoever you may be, you can compare those things directly. So having that one-to-one conversation is really, really important in terms of bringing you to the next phase of your journey. And the 3 store now has been an absolute phenomenal success, to the point where we're seeing, particularly in telecoms, a lot of the planning go towards actually removing the store network in entirety. And the final one I just want to bring you is an absolute fantastic example from Joules. So Joules have been launching their Friends of Joules marketplace platform. They launched this well before the pandemic. And it was a really, really clever and smart move and great initiative for their customers, because Joules have great connections to their target demographic and their audiences, and they've grown up and grown their communities via market towns. Okay. And it's all about creating that look and feel and suiting their product offering to their target audience. And they created the Friends of Joules marketplace and platform before the pandemic, because they wanted to be able to have the best connection and the best engagement with that community. And actually, in the process of this, they've generated this wonderful kind of small business to business, business to consumer environment that enables them to curate this marketplace and connect customers and create an environment that links them and connects them and builds loyalty to the Joules brand itself. And it's been a really, really fantastic example of understanding their heartland customer, understanding how they would typically engage with their customer, and bringing that to the online environment. So really, really great examples. And I just want to finish up with you know, in terms of the digital transformation, how we at Summit are helping our clients and helping our brands really get to grips with what a great digital transformation looks like, so we can maximize any investment and make sure we exceed the expectations of customers. And we look at it across the funnel. So starting with customers becoming aware of your products, of your services, and what they might like to buy, all the way through to loyalty. So if we're thinking about awareness, the question that's most important when it comes to awareness, what triggers the customer mission and brand choice? Why would a customer start to think about that particular product or going on that particular purchase mission? And how can we start to associate ourselves, whether it be via influencers, via channels, via association with other brands, you know, but how can we start to be there at the start of the journey when they're starting to become aware of certain products and certain missions that they want to go on? The next question that's really, really key is around engagement. What marketing channels and content are driving the purchase intent? So how can I use the channel environment to make sure I reach the right audience at the right time and showcase what my particular product offering is and showcase the products I have to sell? Thirdly, around consideration. What experiences are most important to your customers? So that could be, you know, it could be reviews, it could be wish lists, it could be promotions, it could be providing store locators. So all the things that enable a customer to move from kind of engagement to consideration and bring you as a brand and you as a retailer into that consideration with a number of other brands. Okay, so that is when they're defining, they've narrowed the number of possible opportunities and outlets that they're going to buy it from, and we're making sure that we are in the hunt and we're in the mix. And then the next stage is conversion. So what are the touch points? What are the steps that really tip a customer over into purchasing from us as a brand? And how can we essentially de-risk that for a customer? So things like fulfillment, home delivery, free returns, you know, Klarna, Apple Pay, payment solutions, these types of things are all factored into when I come to choose who I'm going to buy my product from. These types of flexible solutions mean that I have less risk, I carry less risk as a customer, and have more confidence in the brand and the retailer. So getting the right combination for your consumer and your products. And the final thing is around loyalty. So what are the loyalty drivers in your market, and how can you keep bringing customers coming back? So these are the 5 big bucket questions that we help all our brands and retailers ask when they start to think about any kind of digital transformation, whether at the start of that journey or whether they're pretty digitally mature. So at Summit, we have a number of events. We've just finished our Changes Now event series, and in the new year, we've kicked off our Retail Reset. We have the next event in 2 weeks' time, so please go to summitmedia.com and have a look and sign up to hear more. Got some great guest speakers from around the retail industry, and we'd be very happy to have you. And, you know, if you want to get in touch with me, my name's Martin Corcoran. There's my email, martincorcoran@summitmedia.com, and be very happy to talk further or discuss any of the principles and examples that we've shared today. Cool.
That's great. Thanks, Martin. That was a really fantastic start to the day, looking at what triggers brand loyalties, consumer behaviour and choice. Just to remind everyone, if you do want to send our panel some questions, our panel starts at 11:20, and we have all our speakers this morning, but joining us for the panel discussion is Fraser Mead, who's the head of global sourcing for the Very Group. So that will start at 11:20. Please send your questions for that. And if you do want to add anything more informally or network or just make a comment as our speakers are delivering their presentations, then please use the chat function as well. We'd love to try to get you engaged in this and to make sure that everybody gets the most out of it that they can. Okay, so we're now going to move on to our second presentation of the morning. This is by Advanced Supply Chain. So we have Caroline Ellis, who's the Business and Client Development Director, and Will Robinson, who's the Business Solutions Director. And they're going to do a bit of a double act together this morning.
Good morning, everyone. So,
morning.
So I've got the great pleasure of moving the slides on. I think Caroline's going to do most of the talking, where I can jump in with some little bits as we go.
Yeah, it's going to be a bit of a challenge, I think, because we're not in the same room, obviously. So it might be a to me to you, to me to you, to try and get a little bit of messaging right through this. So I guess to give you a bit of background on ourselves, Will, do you want to introduce yourself first, I guess, and then I can introduce myself?
Yeah, so we obviously work for Advanced Supply Chain. We've got a long history within the garment industry. Myself, I work with retailers and suppliers, working across multiple channels. So I think a lot of what we're going to talk today about is about those challenges in and around that, and the changes that have come from the pandemic, and kind of what we've experienced along our way.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Caroline Ellis, the Business and Client Development Director, very much involved with the commercial and marketing functions at Advanced. As Will said, as a business, we've been going for 25 plus years as a supply chain and logistics business, and I guess if we go back, that 25 years or even 5 years, the whole landscape was completely different. As a business, we've had to evolve to be able to manage those changes and enable our customers to evolve and be able to service their customer base. And for us, understanding our customer's customer is absolutely vital so that we can continue on that development. And so we're very much a tech-led business. Will's involvement and our whole tech team really enable us to stay ahead of the competition and have technology that underpins our services, which, as we've researched and understand the things that are really important to our customers. Visibility and transparency of supply chain is one of those that's really, really up there with importance. So I guess starting on the presentation, as I say, I'll probably do a bit of the talking and then hand over to Will at some points to give a bit more insight as well. As we know, coronavirus and the whole pandemics really highlighted the fragility of supply chains, and it's kind of turbo boosted the online journey for retailers and consumers, and it's made it essential for everybody to really change how they look and how they manage their supply chains as a whole, and really develop that to be able to offer that multi-channel digital solution. It really has accelerated to the huge degree that I think was always something that was going to be expected, but to happen so quickly in such a short period of time is quite incredible, really.
Yeah, so obviously what we found through our research and through our experience from this was nothing surprising, as everyone in the industry would know. I think what was the thing that most people were struggling with was the unintended consequences of that shift, and how they were going to catch up with how their buying strategies are working, how there's a disconnect now between them and their customers because there's so many more platforms involved in that. So again, it's around the conversations that we've been having on how we connect that, and we'll talk through a few of those examples on how retailers and suppliers are changing that.
So to get a little bit more insight into this and help us to manage and understand the changes, we carried out quite a bit of research with an independent research house. And if you want to go on to the next slide, Will, we've got a little bit more. Oh, sorry, you are already. Yeah, we've got a little bit of some statistics really around the information that we found. So 83% of retailers saw an increased demand in some of their products, and obviously there was a downside to that as well, where some really found that the products they had in their inventory were just completely irrelevant in that period of time. But then around that also, that caused a number of different knock-on effects. There were 63% experienced stock shortages as a result of COVID. And if we look around some of the other areas, we found that 83% of retailers saw an increase in demand of some of their products during that lockdown, but around a third, so 34%, were unable to meet the demand because they just ran out of stock. And that really led to a bit of a scramble in some cases, particularly we experienced with those pure play retailers. I'm sure from a very point of view, Fraser, you were in the same situation where you really needed to increase your purchases on your leisure wear and all of that those kind of products where some of our other customers that really do have a lot of sales within the evening wear, absolutely nobody's able to go out, so it fell off a cliff completely. There was also a shift in managing supply chain as well, where 69% are now more likely to invest in more capital and in stock management technology, so that they can have that visibility. And I think a lot of that is not just around knowing where your stock is; it's actually knowing globally where your stock is and at what point that stock may be going into markdown, and understanding the next journey for that stock as well. It's not just knowing that it's in your warehouse. Where does that stock need to be to maximize your full price sales? And 33% rank smart connected technology as the most important thing that would strengthen their supply chain. We'll be looking forward to actually work with partners who can provide that throughout their supply chains. Sorry, Will, were you going to say something there?
No, we can move on from this one, I think.
Okay, cool. So again, there's three key areas here, really. So retailers long prioritize that perfection. So get it right first time, every time, having that stock in the right place. It just doesn't happen these days, and it hasn't through this whole pandemic. So there's, I suppose, a little bit of an instance now where retailers have got to try and prioritize contingencies to keep their supply chains moving forward during unprecedented times. It's not always possible to think of, the unexpected, but to have a few more things in place to be able to manage that as and when that does happen. It is fair to say that supply chains are becoming more complex, especially for those retailers with a global presence, and managing that stock. And then stock optimizations. Lockdown restrictions, obviously, economic uncertainty, increasing unpredictability, consumer demand have all led to renewed focus on stock performance. 41% of retailers we found throughout our research are investing in auditing stock, whilst a third are diversifying the stock. So actually what's happened has made them think about their offer. Do they widen that offer? Do they expand that offer? It might dilute their inventory, I suppose, in their comfort areas of product that they've been used to selling, but actually it gives them a wider audience. And retailers want that stock to work as hard as possible to drive optimum selling prices and maximize that revenue as well. And I think one of the things, sorry, Will.
Yeah, I think alongside the diligence against disruption as well, there's a lot of conversations going on around the return to what the new normal is going to look like. So we've had a lot of, especially the pure play retailers, who've picked up a lot of the slack from the high street and are hoping to keep those gains. But what we've seen as part of the pandemic is a reduction in the number of returns that are coming back. So if those pure play retailers manage to keep hold of those sales, and when returns come back to a normal level, those retailers are going to have to be ready for that and have their supply chains ready and their stock visibility ready, to be able to start inducting and handling those returns as another inbound source.
Yeah, and that absolutely ties back to the visibility and the real-time visibility of stock positioning. The returns is, in general terms, it's such a large volume that it actually plays such a huge part in the general retailer's inventory. So where is that stock globally, and how quickly is that going to get back to retail sales? Does it get dispatched out on a new order from the return centre? Is that something that we need to look at going forward to reduce that multiple handling and getting that stock back to one central position? It's certainly something to consider. Move on to the next one. Cool.
Yep.
So again, just a few more statistics, really. 31% of, obviously, it's made retailers think about how they, and brands for that instance, think about how they actually sell their product. And we were interested to understand whether that the changes had given a change in mindset as to how they actually sell the products. So our interest was around the D2C model, the direct-to-consumer model, or actually expanding the platforms that brands or retailers actually sell on. 31% are not planning to sell via more channels, 26% unsure, but quite a large percentage there, 42%. So they're planning to grow sales by selling via new channels. this is very much around that whole direct-to-consumer model. The possibility of having one pot of inventory that actually is then for sale on multiple different platforms, whether they be partners, marketplaces, or their own websites, or the bricks and mortar retail, and working from one pot of stock to maximise the volume of product you can have on that marketplace or platform, and maximise the or I suppose minimise the excessive amounts of stock you have to have at your disposal to maximise those sales as well.
I think the drive from this is consumer-led around having a larger SKU base. So I think consumers want more choice, they want more width of options that they want to look for, and that's giving more and more of the brands and the suppliers a little bit more of a challenge to deliver that into all platforms at all times. So I think the supply chains are realigning and rethinking their ways of doing this. Additionally, one of the side effects, obviously, on being on a channel and being selling from that way is that you are more disconnected from your consumer. Even though the data exists better than a bricks and mortar channel, in much as the journey from sale to return to loyalty to all that, you've got a whole heap of data. If you're not the end retailer or the end channel, it can be sometimes very, very difficult to mine that data and really, really understand what your consumers are looking for and go on that product journey with them.
And I guess one of the other things that we've seen during this whole pandemic is the dark stores model. One example of which being Lush, who turned their retail stores into mini fulfillment centres to operate a click and collect model for the direct to consumers, but actually from the store. So Lush Local was created. They had retail space with all the product in that they could sell and package for the click and collect options direct from store. It meant that they didn't have to repatriate that stock back to a distribution centre or a fulfillment centre to be packaged, because they were already struggling with the sheer backlog of online requests and volumes. So that was another option that is shown how the retailers have really thought out of the box a little bit to operate and fulfil the consumer demands. And that's something that's also been happening, in other places as well. The US, for example, where Target and Walmart have operated that same model. It's whether or not this continues, it's a real possibility, obviously dependent upon the product stocked within those stores. And it's something that obviously we see within UK retail as well. There are a lot of retailers that do actually fulfill from stores, but is that something that we're going to see a little bit more often now? It could be an opportunity.
And it's looking for those emerging trends overseas that we're really interested in. In the US, you've got a pretty easy model to return, where you've got the US Postal Service who pick up from your mailbox, at the end of your drive. Whereas we're seeing now Royal Mail starting to roll out the collection from doorstep. We're seeing a lot of these trends kind of emerging now that could become a thing in the UK, where fashion, your changing room becomes your home, and you are just going through trying on different styles and returning them back in a very, very large scale of convenience.
Yeah, that's true. And the what we used to possibly see as convenience hurdles have been eradicating a lot of cases. And there's always going to be that argument, and from someone who personally loves the shopping environment and going onto the retail at the high street and having that whole day out and experience with your friends is great. But the convenience of home shopping and online, we've got that balance there now, and the convenience where you can there's more click and collect or type convenience stores. There is the Royal Mail opportunity to collect from your doorstep. Those hurdles have gone, and this is really, I think, a result of a turbocharged online activity that's come through this whole pandemic. It's kind of forced us down this route, and I think where we perhaps there used to be cases where a bad experience with online, whether that be the cost of getting a parcel, the cost of returning a parcel, the speed at which or the ease at which you could actually send something back has changed. And I think that used to be a reason for forcing people back to the high street. Is that going to be a switch now again? Is that going to be something where somebody may have a poor experience in a store and they may then revert back to online. It's how we see that moving forward, and it'd be really interesting to understand what that looks like, and how quickly are we going to see the new normal, and what that really does look like for consumer habits.
Yeah, and I think obviously I think a few people have touched on this as well this morning, and around the use of Facebook and social media over and above Google. I think that's a symptomatic change that is because there are so many platforms. The one thread that runs between them is the social media platforms. I think if the platforms get smarter and are able to start becoming more integrated with their influencers and have their own online presence, I think we'll start seeing the decline of Facebook as an intermediary that sits here. I think retailers are already seeing the cost of dealing with Facebook as a very, very high barrier, and I think we'll start seeing some real innovation on changing that and removing the social media sites from the loop.
And there's other interesting models out there as well, like the subscription type model, where you sign up, you tell the retailer what your preferences are, what you like, what your sizes are, and you get things sent to your door. You don't even have to do that shopping at all. The convenience factor is really there, that you don't have to do that, even searching on a website to get those items. Or if you do go on a website, if you've put your preferences in, or just based on your shopping habits, you get suggestions. Somebody who looked at this also looked at this. It's a great way of just that ease of shopping that's just evolved. And take it a step further. Will and I were chatting about this earlier. Take that step further. Imagine being able to do a push model based on your returns. You're getting your returns back if they're pristine returns, and you've got somebody in your sort of model of understanding their requirements, and it actually matches with those things you've got in your hand right there from a return centre. You send those straight out. It's almost endless when you can think about the possibilities of that direct to consumer model. It's a really interesting proposition, and I wonder how far it'll go. They're all questions, and I don't think there's any real one answer. There's so many out there. It's just an evolving platform completely.
I think we could talk about this for quite a while, but I think we're very much out of time. And I
think so.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Will and Caroline. I can see that there are some questions coming in already, and we'll go back to those with you when we get to the panel discussion at 11:20. But really interesting from a totally different perspective in terms of inventory and what companies are doing to respond to lockdown and pandemic challenges. So our next speaker is Suzanne Ellingham, and Suzanne is the Head of Content for Retail and Fashion at Hive.
Okay, great. So hopefully everyone can hear me and see the right screen. Hopefully the silence is yes. Okay, great. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. As Julie mentioned, I'm the Head of Content for UK Retail for Hive Group. I have to add a little bit of a disclaimer here as we're a PLC, just say all views are mine and they're not reflective of Hive. So there we go, disclaimer done. But many of you may not be aware of who Hive are and also why I'm relevant as a Head of Content to come here and talk to you very briefly. We essentially run the UK's largest retail trade shows. We have about 110,000 retailers come through our doors sourcing products, and around about 6,500 wholesalers and brands who sell into those retailers. We, I would say, operate across almost all sectors of retail. So we have Spring Fair, which operates across home, gift, fashion, lifestyle, sourcing, manufacturing. We have garden centre retail, have a lot of fashion. And also we have our own pet retail show, which is just starting to take off as well. So where do we sit and why am I in a unique place to kind of comment on UK retail? Well, we obviously have, me and my team, we do a lot of research throughout the year with UK retailers, with the wholesalers and importers and exporters who are our customers. We also work with trade associations, industry partners and governments. I speak quite a lot to the Department of Trade because they're interested to hear what we're hearing from our ecosystem. And we also work quite heavily with trend agencies, market intelligence companies to make sure that we're on top of what's happening in our sector. And added to that, just to give you a little bit of a flavour, these are some of our partners. Obviously, ASBCI is one of them, but we work right across retail. What I'm going to talk to you about today is touching on some of the points you've already heard, but maybe from a different perspective. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what retail's been through, not too much retail performance. I'm a big fan of numbers and trends. They tend to give us a lot of grounding as to what's happening in our different retail sectors and our different shows. I'm also then going to touch a little bit on consumer behaviour, and then I'm going to touch on what all of that is doing to retail as we speak and some of the changes. So hopefully it'll give you a little bit of context behind some of the points that have already been made, but the numbers that I'm about to show through and some of the trends I'm about to show you really do put it into focus why retail is undergoing such rapid change right now. And it's either an exciting time for you to be in retail or a time when you're frantically playing catch up. And I don't think there's an in-between point at the moment. But not to hover on it too quickly, but really to frame what's happened in terms of retail over the last 12 months. As we all know, this is mapping out kind of the first 6 months of last year. One of the biggest surprises is when we first went into lockdown, it took most retailers about 6 to 8 weeks to even online retailers to get their retail operations up and running. So there was a period of around about 5 to 6 weeks during the first lockdown where non-essential retail was shut, and a lot of online retailers were ultimately trying to figure out how to run their business in a safe and secure way. So there was a very large period of last year where there was almost no retail. Physical and then online was swamped as people tried to deal with the capacity and the supply chain issues that came out of it. That roughly went on lockdown last year for the first 3 months, with garden centres allowed to open 2 months later, and then added to that, we kind of reopened most of retail in June. However, we all know that there was a second national lockdown in November. There was also a third national lockdown starting December that we're still in. And added to that, retailers have had the added joy of dealing with Brexit red tapes and supply chain disruption. And anybody that is in here that is importing or exporting and is dealing with the tripling or quadrupling cost of containers and shipments will understand some of the pain around retailers trying to access their stock at the moment. So there's been some serious changes in retail over the last 12 months. However, and this is where it starts to get quite interesting, you would expect that with all of these changes that retail spending would be through the floor, and that's certainly what a lot of people have expected. However, when we look at the average kind of retail sales for most of last year, actually retail performed relatively well. There was breaks between March and June where people were still trying to get their operations up and running. But June, July, August, September, October, even in December, when we went through a month's worth of national lockdown, retail sales across the UK were up. And by quite a little bit, and certainly more than most commentators expected. Obviously, we've gone into January now and people are a little bit more cautious. But what this really shows is actually retail did bounce back quite quickly within the UK. And although retailers felt that pain, as soon as consumers could go out and spend, they did. But added to that, I think what is one of the key things that we found is that, and has already been mentioned, consumer behaviour has fundamentally changed, and it has. There is no going backwards. Whatever the new normal looks like is not what it was 12 months ago. And I think it's because of this. So there's been a lot of research around how long it takes people to form habits. This piece of research came out, I think, towards the beginning of 2019, but 66 days to form a lifelong habit. So we've been in lockdown now maybe for about 5 or 6 months over the last 12. People have gotten used to doing things differently. And this bears true when we look at how much online sales now account for as part of UK retail. So when we started last year, it was accounting for about 19% of all consumer transactions were online. We're now up to 36%. Now that is over a sustained period. It spiked during lockdown, it's continued. Interestingly, when shops reopened, so this period here, you'll see that people still shopped online. We were still considerably higher than we were this time last year. So what is this telling us? It's telling us that UK consumers have adopted new habits, and they are still going into stores where they can, but there are considerably more people. I think according to a number of the large Big Four kind of consultancies, we were not due to hit 36% of retail being online for another 5 or 6 years. So that is a lot of change for retailers to play catch up for. And I think what this does is it shows that Retail sales in the UK last year, not as bad as many people were expecting, and there are definitely winners and losers in this equation. So moving on. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a taste of who the winners and strugglers. It's hard to call them losers because it's just been such a difficult year. But when we look at clothing, footwear, and health and beauty, so the numbers that you're looking at, average weekly sales in these sectors, they're pulled from ONS, so they're publicly available. But what you'll see is 2019, 2020, and the green line is where we're starting in 2021. So you'll see that we're significantly down in 2020, but again, towards August, September, October, there were significant improvements, and people are spending in the same kind of ways that they have done even without lockdown. And that's one of the most surprising things, is when you look at these graphs, the shapes are more or less the same, just people have shifted more of their spend online. One of the surprising ones was health and beauty. We're seeing health and beauty being touted as a major trend. It is, but cosmetics are still things that people like to buy in person. So you have a big wellness trend that is very much popping out spend through online retail. My gut feeling is that it's the cosmetics that have maybe struggled because they are in-store experiences. There is a different side to this, which I'm not going to dwell on too much, which is the sales around homewares, DIY, gardening, and furniture and flooring, which were all up. So again, when we look at where people are spending and where they're not, there's a lot of reasons around this. But when we assume that all retail is behaving the same, they're not. They're very, very different. And some sectors have won. And I would say the biggest winner out of the entire of COVID, probably DIY and gardening. And those spends are still up on this time in 2019. I can see Fraser nodding along, so he must be seeing something as well. But again, it just puts into context when we broad brush all of retail and assume that things are happening in a certain order in a certain place, they're not. Moving on to this, in the same way, not all retailers are equal, not all consumers are equal. So these are numbers that were published about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's estimated by ONS and Retail Economics that the average UK family is £10,500 a year better off. And that they're not spending on holidays, they're not spending on socializing, they're not going to events. So that clothing spend that's been down, it's not necessarily disappeared, they're just saving. Now, further to that, the top 10% are saving £1,800 a month. So that's people who aren't commuting, who are saving that money. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there is definite pain for those people who are having to manage childcare, but that's kind of where we are. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on this, but I would recommend everybody on the call, if they've not looked at this or seen it, there's some really interesting research from Ernst & Young that shows around a future consumer. So what they did is they've looked at all kind of UK retail. It was quite a large group. Hopefully you can still see the right screen. It should say EY Future Consumer Index. Just give me 2 seconds. My screen's just done something strange. Okay, I'm going to continue. There we go. So EY Future Consumer Index. So this is, again, about all of those behaviours that people have had and how we think they're going to merge when people can actually finally get back to store and start sending some of that £10,000 to £20,000 that potentially large proportions have saved. Of essentially what they found is that those people who've been more cautious, so those people who've hibernated and spend as normal, those people who've staved and stockpiled, as soon as they can get out and spend, they're definitely going to be our revenge shoppers. And interestingly, they asked people, when you can get out and spend, what will you spend on? Overwhelmingly, holidays. We all want to go on holiday. We all want to go out to restaurants and socialise. And reassuringly, in some way, for the fashion sector that's been so hard hit, clothing and footwear is high on that agenda as well. So I think there's been a lot of pain within UK retail, but consumers are still spending. But it does mean there is considerable change to retail to come. So I could talk about this all day, but I'm not going to. But I've pulled out 4 of what I consider are some really significant changes that retailers are grappling with at the moment. The live-work dynamic, the changing role of store, shop with purpose, and finding the new. And I think they all impact all sectors of retail and the way that retailers have to consider how they operate. So the first one that we're going to hit is live-work. So again, there's been a lot of, we're all working from home, I'm presenting from home, who'd have thought that? However, this is something that is here to stay. Again, there was some research from Global Data who surveyed about 4,000 respondents, people who worked full-time, said, when you can go back to the office, will you? And actually, quite a large proportion, over 60% there we go, said that actually they don't intend on ever going back to the office full-time. They want a mix of both, or they want to work remotely full-time. Now, added to that, when we look at where people have spent over the last 12 months, remember I said home and everything to do with home is up, it's for this. People have really reassessed how they live in their homes. So again, some research from John Lewis, 28% of people made a home office, like me. Some of them have set up an area for school. Some of them have set up areas for hobbies or gyms. But the point is, people are doing this and doing significant work in their homes because the way that they live and work has fundamentally changed. So how does this impact our retailers? Again, this is a really interesting site. I would recommend it for anybody who's just interested. But what this does is this tracks the economic recovery and how towns and cities are different. And what you'll see there is the top high streets that have really flourished are not the ones you'd expect. Who'd have thought Aldershot and Slough are where people are spending money and visiting more? And look at the bottom, it's our big cities, and they're our main drivers for economic recovery. They're where our offices are, it's where our HQs are, but people just aren't going there. So when we look at retail recovery and what retailers have to do, smaller high streets and towns will recover faster than major cities. Those local high streets and those places where people have discovered those new relationships are going to be key. Delayed return to work is absolutely going to impact city recovery. And the move towards spending more in local high streets is absolutely here to stay. And this leads us on to something quite important, which is retailers are having to consider the financial viability of physical stores. Now, interestingly, Will touched on this a few minutes ago. What is the role of store? So if more is going online and financial viability of physical stores is now in question, what does that look like to retailers? And actually, I think you will see more retailers looking to introduce more of a fulfillment side. I know this trend towards dark stores was mentioned by Lush, but also what I would suspect is that as more of the larger multis are looking to reduce their estates, we'll see fewer stores, smaller stores, more flexible formats, more click and collect, more local. And I think that's got to be a big theme of what we'll see from a post-COVID recovery. I think those people on those high streets who generally, especially with smaller retailers, have struggled with the last mile economics around their supply chain, having a store that carries less stock, that's smaller, that allows you to spend more time with your customers, and again, gives you that ability to maybe build some of that fulfillment into the back end of your store or some of the warehousing you may have close to site, will just make more financial sense. Again, to move on to shop with purpose, all of those habits that we've developed, I bet everybody on this call has discovered a local retailer that they didn't know was there during the last year, or a subscription service that they've loved. And I think this is what we're going to see, is that large retailers have in the main become faceless. And that's one of the key reasons that they've really struggled to connect with their customers. Whereas there's been a massive movement this year around kindness, around shopping local. And actually, from a retailer perspective, I think retailers need to be closer to those smaller high streets now. I think people want those locally sourced products. They want to be seen to be supporting their communities. And for retailers, this means they really need to look at how they are serving their community, where they are getting their products from. And I think, again, as I've mentioned, larger retailers will start to trial smaller stores with more local stock. And I think that is an interesting proposition. I'm going to whiz through this last bit. I think the key thing is that retail is not transactional. Too many small independent retailers see technology as something that just is transactional, either on their website to help it sell or on store to help it go into an EPOS. I think retailers, we see the big retailers who are happy to experiment with AR or all of these different types of technologies, but 80% of our high street is I think this is quite key. Retailers will need to assess how technology impacts their customer experience and also reassess their business models quite considerably. It's no surprise that we have seen retail stressed at the moment. I think if you consider that the online has been rapidly sped up, there's a convergence of this physical of digital world. I think there's that change in nature of physical stores and how people want to assess. And I think what we're entering into for retail is what's been termed, I think, the resilience economy. If you don't have an online presence, you haven't got your supply chain ducks in a row, you may not survive the next 12 to 18 months. And that's quite a somber message, but it means people do have to move on. So again, supply chains and sourcing have been disrupted. Onto my last slide. I think when we look at finding the new, and this is something that we've seen over the last year, is what's going to become key is closer partnerships with suppliers and online sourcing. I think there has been a lot of talk around acquisition, but I think the reality is that retailers are going to have to look at how they work with every partner, from their manufacturers to their supply chain partners, and really get closer to them. I think over the last 12 months, we've seen retailers become increasingly reliant on existing suppliers for newness. Consumers want newness. It's kind of what drives retail. There hasn't been enough of that coming through. And what many smaller independent retailers are sourcing from, they're sourcing as if they are consumers. They're looking online. But the reality is they have smaller minimum order values, and they are experimenting with smaller stock runs. I think what's interesting is the dichotomy with third-party marketplaces. At a time when we are looking at marketplaces as being a really good access point for those independent retailers, you have an entire opposite of a lot of large retailers wanting direct access to their consumers. So it'll be interesting to see how those two dynamics play out. And obviously, selfishly, the loss of our trade shows has been felt. We've run no, I've probably run more than that. I've probably run 5 digital sourcing shows in the last 6 months. And the most recent one being Spring Fair at Home, that was a few weeks ago. We had over 16,000 retailers online. We had 600 exhibitors. We had thousands of people connecting with each other, looking for newness and product. So I think people and retailers are still looking for that newness, and they are looking to source. But we work in retail. Nothing changes the touch and feel of a product and being able to see what you're about to start selling. And just as a last thought, again, one of the people that we work with on a regular basis is Theo Pafitas, and he said, I'm not going to run through this because I think I've just quickly run through it. Shopping is like a national sports for us Brits, and we love the touch and feel of our products, and I can't wait to get back to it. And I think this is echoed. Technology is great, but we love product. And we love playing in stores. And I think the challenge for retailers is to work out where the wins are in technology and how they bring that into store with their customers.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. We are running a little behind, and apparently the poll questions didn't launch at the beginning of our webinar. So we're just going to launch them now before our panel gets together. Here we are. So this is the first one. Have you changed your shopping habits as a result of the pandemic? So very, very simple. Just click on one of those 3 answers to answer the poll. And remember to keep on sending your questions through. We've had some questions already for our panel coming through on the questions bar, or if you've got any comments, you can just put those into the chat, which is more for networking and more informal discussion. So if you just click one of those, and then this is the second poll question. Will these changes continue after the pandemic? So as you can see, they're very simple questions, nothing to trip you up. It's really just to gauge your opinion on what you think based on your own experience, the experience of your friends and family, the experience of your business, or the experience of your organisation or customers has been. And we will come back to those poll questions at the end of today. Great, thank you. So moving on now, we're going to welcome back all of our speakers so far, and also Fraser Mead, who is the head of global sourcing for fashion at the Very Group. So Fraser's been with us right from the start, listening to everything, and I've seen you taking notes, Fraser, and putting your thumbs up. So you've been very active right the way through. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. So I'm going to start off with a question for everyone, really. Do just chip in. It's quite a generic question, as and where you feel you can answer. So what about the brands such as Primark who haven't had a website? We've heard a lot about online retail, the growth of online retail, and particular product sectors too. But how do you think that will impact business going forward if a company doesn't have a website, or a very effective website at the moment? What can they do?
I think Primark have always been the standout high street retailer who isn't online, and I think it's definitely a strategic place that they've been at for a while. It's a risk. You can understand why they would take it. They want to be seen as a value retailer. They want to be seen as, you know, they want to be able to shift in volume. So when consumers enter the store, they're picking up, you know, item after item, and that's their successful business model. With the trend that the high street is on, it seems like a risk. I think most retailers looking at that see that as a risky strategy. However, I think if they were to pivot on that strategy, I don't think it would be too difficult to switch to and turn on an online channel. But I think it's yeah, from my perspective, it definitely seems like a risk.
I would agree with that, in the sense that, you know, there'll be a number of customers who they won't then be able to sell to, who are exclusively in the online channel. I guess one of the things that I guess I've been reading about different retailers and trying to understand them is, you know, the ability to use concessions and things like that. So how do they make it easier, you know, particularly on the impulse perspective, which is, you know, as Will said, a lot of customers are picking up more items than they thought because they're at the lower end of the price point. So how do they make it more readily available? And, you know, online makes it available at all points, at all times, but actually putting yourself in smaller store formats and aligning yourself potentially with other kind of you know, whether that could be supermarkets or whatever, which means where there's a large footfall and a lot of the customers are coming through the door anyway, could be a good strategy.
I think a lot of it is also down to the basket as well. You know, with the Primark, the prices are such that it is that impulse purchase, but it's also that basket value. And, you know, when you put in the mix the carrier charges, the return costs, what does that look like? You know, they'd have to charge because somebody could be buying, you know, a £1 vest. How do you manage a £1 vest? And, you know, as a single item, not necessarily it would be a single item, but how do you manage that as an overall online offer? It's a difficult challenge unless you start, like you say, you know, doing that kind of concession or you know, pair with a platform where it's part of another larger offer. Yeah, I'm sure.
And just to add in, I think we have a tendency to look at retail and think of only those very large multiples and those people who have the budget behind them. I think for a lot of our smaller independent retailers, they have to have a website now. It's a customer expectation. If you're not online, then that actually sends its own message. Your website doesn't have to be transactional if you want to just have a Facebook store or be on social media, but you have to have an online presence. It's become a customer expectation now.
I think they've got a very strong raison d'etre, Primark, and obviously they're clearly hugely successful, and they really understand what they stand for in the eyes of their customers, and I think that without a doubt they will be looking at other outlets, I think, but somebody already mentioned, I think the sort of lower value of those products means the logistics are actually, and therefore the cash generation from those in an online environment are more challenging than people would think, actually.
Okay, thanks everyone. I've got a question that follows on from that, really. So for small independent retailers with limited resources, the transition is difficult. How do you recommend they proceed to implementing digital transitions within these constraints?
We'd we had an event with Organics last month, and it's really interesting. A really big branded kind of baby consumer FMCG, and you would think that they took like the super big brand approach to it, but they didn't. They managed to go D2C. They went from nothing to something for under £10,000. So they didn't have to go and invest huge proportions. They used the resources that they had available. They use free-to-use platforms to build the business case. And, you know, I think there's a bit of a myth and a bit of a fallacy there that it is really expensive to go online. It's not. You can do it very cost efficiently. As you grow your operation, you need to make sure that the experience kind of marries up with the demand that you're getting from customers. But starting out, I completely agree with, you need a website, you need to showcase your products, you need to enable customers to review you, to give you feedback, to be able to engage with you online. But the cost of doing that shouldn't be astronomical as you start out, you know, whether that be a website build, you know, whether that be partnering up with delivery and fulfillment and online marketing channels. You know, you can go and spend £100 in terms of paid advertising in Facebook, in Google, in Snapchat. You can put £100 in each of those channels and test which ones work best for you, and only do the ones that deliver the sales. You know, that's the beauty of online, is the measurability and the scientific nature for how you grow your business.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the cost of TVs. You know, they used to be relatively expensive. They're not now. IT is very similar. We've been through a process of upgrading a number of our systems and thought it would be horrendous. And in fact, it can be. You have to be specific about what you want that system to do. Not over-specify and obviously not under-specify. But I think that the key with all of these systems that you get is that they transferable across the whole of your business and can interact with existing systems quite seamlessly. I think where sometimes people have problems is they'll buy a digital system, let's say, I don't know, for processing garments or something, which tends to be an end-to-end system, but they only use part of it because the business that they operate isn't connected enough to get everybody on that journey. And that can be the reality for a lot of companies. That obviously, you know, you'd throw your hands up in horror at the thought of it, but it can be the reality, I'm afraid.
I've got a couple of questions now, I suppose for Fraser, for Will and for Caroline. So there, I think it was in Caroline and Will's presentation that you mentioned that there was a reduction in returns. And there was a question, can you highlight why there's a reduction in returns? But then there's also another question regarding returns as well, product return. Is the return of products high through online shopping? Because consumers still can't try on the products. So let's find out what the actual truth is. Fraser, I guess it's over to you to begin with.
Yeah, the cost of returns is enormous to a business. Online businesses, I mean, it varies in terms of percentage of goods that come back, but 50% plus is not unusual. And depending on the size of those products, that can cost you between, I don't know, £1.50 to £3, you know, to get the thing back, get it reprocessed and get it back into stock. And by the time you get it into stock, is it still relevant to the customer? So returns generally means markdown, and obviously markdown means cash loss. So I thought my colleagues on the call today did a really brilliant job in terms of highlighting the importance of stock control. I think it was Martin touched on it, and Caroline and Will. Stock control is huge, and the way that we do that is ensuring that we're very good at trumpeting customer-facing digital technology. So we're very good at trumpeting AI and avatars and, you know, all singing, all dancing digital, because we need to do that, because we need to bridge that emotional gap that online lacks relative to going into a shop, which is a much more social experience. But what we have to also be really careful of, and what we're really conscious of at Very, is ensuring that we connect the journey from a product sort of birth all the way through to that point. And we're by no means there, but we feel that you've got to be careful that the horse doesn't bolt away from the cart, because once you reach out to customers in that digital way, you have to be able to fulfill your promises, and that is like the first rule, really.
Yeah. So I think coming back to the percentage of returns that we saw during the pandemic, the percentage definitely dropped from what we saw, but we saw that because that was a shift in what people were buying. So obviously your occasion wear, your things that are very, very specific fit, saw a reduction in sales, and we saw an uplift in sales in things like loungewear and things like that. And you can imagine buying a sweatpants, there's a lot of elasticity in there, so the likelihood of it fitting is much higher. We saw a reduction though in the number of people who were bracketing, so people who were buying size medium and large to see which fit, that reduce in the same style, in the same basket, because I think people were very wary of the returns side of things during a pandemic, and knowing that they would need to go out and find a way. And if you're sending it via a parcel shop, for example, and that's a non-essential retailer that you normally go to, like to you or somewhere like that, then your returns options were somewhat limited. So similarly on the back of that, there were a few opportunities. So we had retailers who, obviously because their product mix had changed, they were able to use that return space and start routing the lesser selling goods back into a dark storage scenario. So they didn't put it straight back into their FCs. They could route it in a different direction. And I think we're definitely now seeing people getting a little bit more used to and comfortable with the returns. So the returns percentages are starting to eke back up. We're not pre-pandemic levels yet, but we are definitely seeing people becoming more and more comfortable with the concept of returns. And just one extra piece on there as well is that we've definitely seen a trend of retailers using more and more technology to avoid it. There's the old adage that, you know, every return is a failure, really. The customer doesn't want to, you know, buy two sizes and send one back. That's an inconvenience. So we're seeing a lot of technology that's being employed with fit assistants and things like that are really, really showing you that for this particular brand, this size, based on your previous purchases and what you've returned, this is the size that is better suited to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that goes back. I totally agree with that, Will. But it also goes back to how you design products as well, because it's an interesting one, because our industry hasn't really changed in the way we design garments in the whole of the 40 odd years that I've been in it. And it's only in the last 10 years that digital technology has started to change that. And we've actually been able to design products in 3-dimension. We've been able to replicate fabric flex and the look of a product when somebody's moving in it digitally, and being able to ensure that pinch points and fit and pressure points throughout the body are actually taken into account when you're designing digitally. And obviously that reduces the number of samples that we have to make. That increases the accuracy of the product that we deliver, and that ultimately results in a better customer journey and results in a reduction in returns. So I think to go back to what I said a little bit earlier, I think it's really important that we connect the dots right from the beginning in order to ensure that that customers actually get what they think they're buying. Because I think some of the dissatisfaction and those high return rates comes from a disconnect that exists in the industry a little bit at the moment, where we physically design and produce product and then we sell it digitally, and we it's an image to the customer in 2 dimensions at the moment digitally, that doesn't truly reflect what the garment's actually going to look like.
Yeah, no, and totally agree. And I actually think as well, one of the bits of information is business intelligence around your returns as well. So you're doing all of that. If you get your returns back and you're not really understanding if a product or a type of product has got a fit issue, not getting that business intelligence around your returns patterns, again, you're not connecting those dots, are you? It's just a return, and you're not really connecting the fact that actually that product or that factory, that manufacturer has got an issue that keeps recurring. Could be a rogue pattern cutter just not quite getting the doing something right. You just don't know, but yeah, that business intelligence to just help you connect those dots is really vital.
I think to be truly digital first, and this isn't a statement that that I'm making up. This is something that a CEO said to me, was actually when they create content and when they create the look and the feel of their clothes and their items, it needs to be primarily for the digital first channel. So many retailers are caught in terms of the content is trying to direct people towards their stores. And actually, then when it comes to repurposing that content through digital channels, it doesn't do the job that is required. So actually, the mindset of creating digital first content and then repurposing that back to stores rather than the other way around is really, really important.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to another question around shopping, which I have to confess, I don't understand it. So maybe you can help me. So what is the likely reception or impact of swarm shopping? I've never heard of swarm shopping. I don't know if any of you have. Suzanne, Martin?
I think
sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we've seen some examples of this and some business strategies that are planning on this one. So if you imagine with an influencer being able to target people towards a product, you see a very, very different logistics challenge. So again, probably I'm just speaking from my logistics background on this, but you've got a high number of orders, single unit orders that are the same products that are going out, and this is a bit of a switch in the retailer mindset by saying that instead of having a product and having a shop front that we're all used to having, we're effectively now moving into a push model where we're saying this is our product and we're trying to get it across via influencers and things like that to say that we're doing. So I don't know if I've got the terminology right there, but if that's what they mean by the swarm thing, then we are definitely seeing a trend moving towards that.
I heard it described as the Holly effect, when Holly Willoughby wears something on TV on in the mornings. If it's a nice dress or if it's a nice outfit, they see one of our retailers saw 1,000 extra orders coming in that morning because of what they described as the Holly effect.
Well, I just Googled it also, and it's the Google videos were of swarm stores or swarm shopping around Black Friday. So is it the FOMO thing, fear of missing out on a really good bargain, so you're buying it? I don't know. Could be that.
I think from my view, it's just essentially people clamoring for the same thing, whether it's in store, there's an event that's happened that's driven people there. I think the interesting implication for this for fashion is obviously we're all quite conscious of mass production, and we're seeing a lot of smaller retailers and brands doing much smaller exclusive runs. Off topic slightly, but I was having a conversation with the head of retail for a very, very large charity who's just started doing some really interesting collaborations with very well-known artists. And she said when they release a limited edition run of a product that's say 500, it goes instantly. And I think that's the influencer effect. But I think it's got some interesting implications for the just simply the sales model within fashion, where consumers are becoming more and more conscious that of mass production, of understanding the costs of product production. So I think there's some interesting developments there, I think.
Yeah, we've definitely seen some ethical problems with copying designers. I think we won't name the retailers, but some retailers have got themselves in hot water by copying independent designers' work that's appeared on the catwalks, made them for sale very, very quickly, and found that they're infringing other people's intellectual property. And there's some other weird scenarios as well. I don't know if anyone's noticed, but in the past few weeks there's been a bit of a shortage of feta cheese. On the back of Snapchat videos and things of making a particular recipe. And again, that's another supply chain challenge, that when something becomes very popular or very popularized, not even from a single source, the feta cheese thing has just been recipe after recipe that's kind of gone viral. Again, supply chains and retailers have to be adept and agile to react to these and have the finger on the pulse. Like if you're looking at your sales on a Monday morning and realizing that you're out of feta cheese after the event, you've missed your opportunity.
Yeah, and I've got next to my feta cheese mountain, I've obviously got my toilet roll mountain and my pasta and rice.
I think there's some interesting retail phenomena that's occurring internationally, actually, which we don't always see in the UK and in Europe, but certainly in Asia. China is hugely digital, and they have, we think we sort of have or used to, obviously it's died slightly, but the Black Friday events in the UK are just sort of child's play compared to Double 11, which is the 11th of November equivalent in China. But China have a whole range of really innovative buying options for consumers, and obviously it's a massive population out there. But for example, you can group together with your friends and buy a product or buy a number of products. Say there's 20 of you, you all want to buy a certain item. And you'll get a discount, and they sort of encourage this sort of innovative options. And during their equivalent of Black Friday, lots of interactive games, put down $50 a week in advance of the sale, and we'll give you 25% across anything you buy with that. So I think they are ahead of us in a lot of cases in terms of, I think Martin mentioned sort of digital personalization at the beginning, and they definitely we can learn something from those guys.
And from living in Hong Kong over 20 years ago, I was getting my groceries delivered there way before we had grocery deliveries in the UK.
Yeah, and in Turkey, there's a company and they're coming to London quite soon, who, if you want a pint of milk and a newspaper and a loaf of bread, they'll get it. They guarantee they'll get it to you in 10 minutes. And if you want bigger items, they'll get it to you within an hour. But it's the sort of equivalent of going to the corner shop. So it's out there.
So look out for that. I'm going to move on to something slightly different now, which is the question about sustainability. So as the sustainability agenda gets more ingrained in society, the major concept is to reduce consumption. What effect do you think this will have on high street sales and, I guess, online sales too?
I think it's really important, and every retailer is very conscious of their environmental footprint. I personally think it's something that you as a business have to sort of ingrain into your business, and I'm not a big one for shouting about what you do. We do quite a lot in terms of energy saving and that sort of stuff, but we try not to shout about it because it just has to become part of your DNA. And I think I've got a daughter who constantly badgers me about this, who's in her late 20s, and we have to realize that people expect it to be the norm now, and people expect us to get on with it quietly, and it's almost like a given that you try to reduce the impact you have. And I think recycling, charities are gaining ground. We've all got I think most retailers got connections with charities where we don't job off stock to get 10p in the pound anymore. We actually get it re-centered into the community to do some good.
I think there was a great example from H&M recently, who pivoted their kind of paper-based loyalty scheme. So they combined, a digital channel, they combined recycling of old denim, and they also combined it with kind of the collection of loyalty points and discounts together, which was a really, really good example of kind of skinning the loyalty question multiple ways, skinning that cat with a few different mechanisms and bringing together what really mattered to their consumers and putting it in a really simple and practical way that meant they could make a difference, make their customers feel good, and also put it into a model that means that they can win also via more sales and more loyalty.
Yeah.
From a supply chain point of view, it's amazing how many of the initiatives go hand in hand with cost savings, and that's the crazy thing. So many of the initiatives and projects that we've worked on over the years not only deliver, you know, sustainability benefits, but cost savings to the businesses. So some of them are just very easy and very sensible changes to make. I think from a fashion perspective, I think we're still very led by consumers who are still very eager to consume. And I think, you know, the tide turning on this one will be when consumers start demanding better quality, where they start demanding that the garments that they buy, you know, last longer, rather than throwing them away before they're completed. They'll start demanding back from retailers that, you know, with a higher level of faulty returns and things like that, I think retailers will have to swivel and change their approach to garment tech to make their garments more hard wearing.
Yeah, I think just to add into this, we're partnered with the UN, so we work quite heavily around the SDGs to message as much of that information into our customer base as possible. And we've been doing this for a number of years, and I think the message is slowly starting to get through. But as mentioned, it really is led by consumers. And unfortunately, although there are cost savings there, for many smaller businesses who want these sustainable products, they are more expensive. So it goes hand in hand with consumers want this, but there's a consumer awareness now that these products just cost a little bit more. And the importance actually comes in the storytelling of the retailers. So if the retailers have got those values and they live them and they genuinely do, you know, you can't be saying that you're sustainable and then having a manufacturing operation in China that has got horrific kind of standards. So, and consumers will kill you for it if you're found to be having that double standard. But I think what's interesting is a number of research pieces over the last year that said consumers understand it costs more to be sustainable. They are now willing to pay more for the product. So it really does shift on and puts a little bit of onus onto the brands, onto the retailers to make sure they're telling the story of the product. Because if consumers have an option now between buying something that's sustainable or doing good or sourced locally, they will choose to spend their money differently. And I think that's going to become really key to how quickly a lot of the sustainability initiatives come forward. To say something slightly unpopular, I think for many retailers, the last 12 months has been about survival, and sustainability is kind of taken a little bit of a back seat, but I think we'll see it start to come back as we start to get back to some normality of trading.
And look towards health, beauty and wellness, where that particular industry and vertical is light years ahead in terms of the ethicability of products and the expectations of customers.
Thanks, Martin. We are out of time. I'm sorry to everybody who has asked questions and I've not got around to them. They've been coming in thick and fast. I'd like to now go back to our 2 poll questions that we had earlier and have a look at the results from those poll questions. As ever with these panel discussions, we could go on. We could add an extra 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, and we still wouldn't get through all the questions that come through. So apologies to any of the delegates today. If I've not asked your question, it's simply because we've had so many. I've tried to make sure that we covered as many as we could. So do we have the results for our 2 poll questions that we asked our delegates? I'm hoping they will be coming up on screen very shortly. So before they, here we are. So the poll results there, majority, as you would imagine, of our delegates today have been buying less. That's just disappeared again. Yeah. So the majority of our delegates have been buying less, as you would imagine, and buying different items as well. But far fewer people are buying more. So the second question we were asking, will these changes continue after the pandemic? And the majority of you today answered yes, with another large percentage saying you're not sure, and only a very small group saying no, these changes will not continue after the pandemic. So I hope that very simple couple of questions have given you some insight into general consumer behaviour. So I'd like to thank everyone today, our speakers and our panellists. It's been really fascinating. I've enjoyed it. The hour and a half that we've had, it's gone very, very quickly. I'd like to also thank Eurofins for our technical partner today, for our platform that we've been using and for managing it so well, and to Bee Cousins in particular. Thank you. And just to remind you that we do have a date for your diary going forward, which is the 12th of May. We've got our online conference. We usually have an ASBCI annual conference, but our online conference this year is a continuation of Beyond 2020, Survival of the Smartest. So thank you all for attending today. Thank you to our speakers, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.